order the Wednesday, September 22nd meeting of Narberth Borough Council. It is 7:34 p.m. Ms. Bryant, could you please call the roll?
Sure. Council President Aaron Ruderich.
Present.
Council Vice President Bob Weisford. Here. Councilmember Fred Butch. Here. Councilmember Barbara Fortner.
Here.
Councilmember Rob McGreevy.
Here.
Councilmember Michelle Panopoulos.
Here.
Councilmember Cindy Rickards.
Here.
Mayor Andrea Deutsch. Here. Great, everyone's here.
Thank you. I feel like I'm in a time machine. Welcome, Councilor Fortner, to the table. Would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I have no specific comments, Ms. Mayor.
Just a couple. Just a reminder to everybody that schools are back in session. People are home from vacations. Our streets are getting more crowded with cyclists and pedestrians. So I'm just gonna reiterate the message that we always send to mind your P's and Q's when you're driving in the borough. We want everyone to get where they're going safely and soundly. Just be patient if you're riding behind someone. Use your patience. Observe all traffic laws with regard to buses. Please come to a full stop when it comes to buses while their lights are on. If you get caught violating these rules, it is a hefty, hefty ticket that is not worth it. So just please observe those rules and make sure you're paying attention as we're driving around our streets. So if you have a phone, put it away, don't text. And please just let's be kind to one another. You're not going to get where you're going much faster by violating laws, and all you're doing is putting people at risk. So just asking you to do that. Next, I have the monthly police report, and I'm going to submit that, and that is it.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to the public comment section of the meeting. We'll start with the people in the room, starting in the front, moving over to Mr. Grove, who I imagine has something to say. If you could just state your name and address for the record, and I will give you 3 minutes.
You want me to speak now?
Please do, sir.
I have comments about 3 Elmwood Drive and the proposed development. My wife is reading this to the meeting that's currently going on in Lower Merion as we sit here. Lot 3 Elmwood Avenue is a triangle of land wedged between a railway embankment to the north and a sweeping curve of East Windward Road to the south. At its very narrow point to the west is a very busy intersection with traffic lights and the mouth of the tunnel that issues from Narberth. The triangle's base to the east sits hard against the bank of the East Indian Creek, a tributary to Cobbs Creek, which, as everybody knows, has a long history of severe flooding. This is not a good place to build, and what we see here is a developer trying to cram a quart into a pint pot. This 1.8-acre lot, which is the last, indeed the only fragment of natural open space in Narberth, presents us with an historic opportunity. The township should say no to this proposed development. The commissioners should put their heads together with the councillors of Narberth Borough, whose 7 planning commissioners have already given a unanimous thumbs down to this proposed development, and look to the idea of jointly purchasing this delightful site with a view of turning it, with neighborhood help, into a quiet, walk-in sitting park for the residents of South Narberth. Residents who, at this time, have not 1 inch of open space beyond the school playground. These developers are skillful. At the last meeting, they displayed a map colored green in a way that showed the proposed site as being much larger than it really is. They included the owner's property to the east of the street, This, of course, made their proposed development appear to cover a much smaller percentage of the site than if only the portion to be developed was colored green. They speak of a rain garden. This site has been found to have extreme percolation problems at its lower end due to a heavy clay underlay. As it now stands, this delightful lot with its gently sloping meadow, numerous bushes and mature trees is itself a perfect rain garden. Putting a mere strip of rain garden at its eastern end after covering much of the site with buildings, parking areas and access roads is nothing more than a token, a clever but useless gesture. This is a historic moat for Lower Merion Township and Malvern. Please, each of you, go to the site and take a few steps on it. You will see immediately what a delightful walk-in city park it would make, one that would be enjoyed for generations to come. Please, do not vote in a way that disfigures this delightful green approach to our village, but vote to allow it to become an asset for all and for all time. Thank you
Thank you, Mr.
for
Grove.
letting me read this to you.
Thank you, sir. Moving down the front row, moving to the second row, I'll start here on the right. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm John Surrey. I'm of 7 Elmwood. I think my family are probably the closest to this development in distance. And we just wanted to share 3 thoughts. One is if you come and stand in our backyard, which we see as a garden, you would know straight away that this is the most beautiful, unspoiled paddock almost in front of us that we look out over, which will be decimated. It's a natural habitat for wildlife, animals, and kids can come and play there even. So it would be, so that's thing number 1. We're destroying a beautiful, open, natural space. 2, if we go along with this. 2, it's actually going to spoil our own enjoyment of our own property, because now we have this wonderful view, and then moving forwards beyond that, while the building is taking place, it will be horrendous living next to it. Even when they did the soil samples and the water samples, they had one machine there, and we couldn't even work or hear ourselves think in our own kitchen right next door. So it's going to become, it's going to spoil our own enjoyment of our property. And then lastly, it will also damage the value of our property significantly, we believe. We've done some calculations and we are very concerned about that aspect as well. So those are our 3 comments on this issue.
Thank you, sir.
Also, may I just add to that? I'm a mountainite, I also live at 7 Elmwood. Our neighbours are the Allwins, who have, I understand, optioned the land to the developer. And we have, my neighbour indeed, hi Albert, you know, our main concern, you know, apart from the devaluation of our property, is obviously what we look out on, what we bought our house for 10 years ago, that, as my husband said, there was one tiny yellow digger in the garden. My husband, since COVID, everyone's working from home. You know, my husband works in the kitchen. He couldn't work that for those few hours. Now, how long is this construction if, please goodness, you do not accept it? Sorry, Albert. You know, how long is that going to go on? You know, we have considered selling our property, but the construction site next door, how would we ever do that? You could wipe off hundreds of thousands of value on our property and also our next door neighbours, but particularly ours, because we have the largest property, you know, apart from, you know, in size wise, in garden size, you know, than any other house on Elmwood Avenue. We are directly next door. The sound of anything, you know, we hear, our dogs would go crazy, they go crazy if someone's playing next door. You know, this would be terrible for all of the neighbourhood, because it's very annoying. I just think that it is the suggestion for the boroughs to get together and actually provide the South Narberth residents who pay huge amounts of taxes with a beautiful space to sit and actually where children can play, older children could sit, you could have special areas, older children to play that don't involve, you know, because where do they go? You know, let's try and keep them out of trouble. Let's try and keep them off the train tracks. You know, a space where, you know, we could have beautiful large chess sets. You know, we could create a really lovely, beautiful space in that area that could become a really wonderful community space. And, you know, as much as I love my neighbours dearly, I do, we are seriously opposed to the development because that one afternoon when the digger was on, we couldn't work, my daughter couldn't do school, you know, it was, it's completely untenable from our perspective. And I think from all my neighbours' perspective, but we would be the ones that would be mostly affected by it on a very deep and personal level.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. On the line, yes, ma'am. Your name and address?
I'm Phyllis Greenwald, 26 Elmwood. I've been there for 24 years. I've never been to one of these meetings and hadn't planned to speak, but I don't know what the process is and what's going on about this, except I did. Of course, I'm opposed to this because of the disruption, both immediate for construction and long term. And I'm perplexed about how this construction could happen. Where will they access the site from? Is it going to be from little tiny dead end Elmwood Avenue? Is it going to be from busy Wynwood? Is it where would it be from that big traffic jam under the bridge now? Anybody know?
So I'll answer your question, but generally this is sort of your opportunity to comment
Okay.
and not do a sort of question and answer, but the access point would be on Wynwood Road. So if that helps you with the remainder of
Well,
your
there's two
comments.
Wynwoods that meet right there. Which one? The one that, I forget which is.
It would be
Eastwood or North-
East Wynwood Road.
Which is the one that goes under this? No.
No.
That's at the end of our street.
It would be, it's
So
the
that-
main Wynwood
So
Road.
that means that's where all the construction vehicles will be and all of that for all that time?
Yes.
Okay. Well, maybe that's what it, nightmare that would be. Anyways.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McDonough, or, sorry, sir, did you have a comment? Okay,
Hi, I'm Rosemary McDonough. I'm at 9 Elmwood Avenue. I've lived on Elmwood Avenue since 1984. And I trust you've gotten my letters today and in the past. I guess I'm basically just here to say that Elmwood Avenue is tired. Okay, we've had to put up with an awful lot of stuff in the last couple of years, and we've pretty much had it. In addition to the bridge, which I know is not your fault, which has cut us off from the rest of Narberth. We had to fight 198, which was the Baptist church. We had to fight a bed and breakfast. We had to live with several really houses that look like they belong in a Halloween movie. Thank God one of them is coming down. And we just feel that this is yet the latest thing that will take away from our property value. As I mentioned in my letter, this project has really something for everybody to just like, okay, if you're worried about the environment, trees, safety, traffic, flooding, I mean, this has something for everybody. And I really hope that you will listen to the unanimous opinion of your planning commission, which has taken quite a bit of time to look at this, and look at the many letters that I know you should have gotten about 5 letters this afternoon. So I don't want to repeat myself, but just reinforce what I said. Thank you.
thank you. All right, moving to the back row, starting behind Ms. McDonough. I know we have some of our presenters here. Sir,
And let me speak.
please do. Your name and address?
My name is Albert Elwood. I'm the address at 3 Elmwood Avenue. And I just want to start back at the history of this property. When I bought it, say 11, 12 years ago, the house was in major disrepair. I think the previous owners was very elderly. The house was run down. I put a significant investment in the property. I think I built up the value of the house I owned there. And this is basically like I worked all my life, just like on this age, and I got 3 young daughters It's grade one in college, 2 grades start college. I mean, so I'm not, my legacy to them is to educate them and provide education to them. And so this way, I think, is a good opportunity for me to subdivide the property. I'll still have an acre left at the main house. I think it's a win-win for everybody. I think the developer reinvents, for a long time, we went over this. He's going to win, I'm gonna win. I think Marvel will win. I mean, on the taxes that they collect, and I think when they talk about taxes, I think I may be the biggest taxpayer in the community. Understand me? So I pay significant, a lot of taxes, a lot of upkeep on that property. And we talking about minor conveyances, so we had construction for a couple months. You know what I mean? Doing the working hours from what, 9 to 6. So we talking about minor conveyances, inconveniences. Now you look in the town, they building 2 apartment buildings. So what about the neighbors there? What about the different inconveniences that they're going through, parking and everything? So we talking about a small project on the fringes of Narberth, and it's insignificant. And I think of being treated unfair. You know, everybody wants to be a public park. It's not a public park, it's a private park. I had to cut the grass, maintain it, pay taxes on it. Nobody's helping me with that. I think it's my right to be able to subdivide.
Thank you, sir. Moving down the line. Any other comments? No, and then it's Chief Gallier. Okay. Now we'll go to comments of those who are accessing this meeting remotely. And I will allow Ms. Bryant to manage that and call them out as she unmutes.
Yeah, so, what we are gonna do here is, I'm actually going to, mute everyone to keep some order, to this. And if you would like, okay, I see a number of people already know the process I use and have the hand signal going. So I'm just gonna go as I see people on the list here, and we will work our way down. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm kind of far away from the computer screen, so I'm trying to see names here. Our first one is gonna be Judy, Miss Judy Watman. They're gonna get a thing to unmute.
Hi, my name is Judy Watman, and I live at 120 Elmwood Avenue, not on this beach behind me. I've been to many meetings regarding the development of this property. Narberth needs open space. We do not need more apartments. This plan will only allow for more water to run off to neighboring properties. The entrance and exit to this property is an accident waiting to happen. It will cause more traffic into the turning lane near the bridge. And if someone decides to make a left-hand turn onto East Wynwood Road, there will definitely be an accident. This land should be donated to the borough, not built upon. Please do not approve this development proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Carol Marie Scanlon.
No donors.
Good evening, Carol Marie Scanlon, Sabine Avenue. I liked Judy's comment on open space, because as I've been talking to this council and letting you know the importance of open space in the borough and placing open space protection on our parks, that will prevent any development for the future generations on our parks. So I'd like, again, this council to look at the importance of open space. Narberth should have, the standard is 10 acres of open space per 1,000 residents. Right now we have 7 acres of open space. We should have 40 acres of open space. So the importance of our parks is vital. So I'd like to encourage this council to place open space protection on our parks.
All right, next up we have Joe Pepper.
Thank you. I appreciate it. As you mentioned, my name is Joe Heffern. I'm an attorney representing the Sabine Coalition. I've actually been in front of the council before. I wanted to come by tonight, looking over the agenda, there were a couple points I wanted to make, questions asked. I don't know if they would get answered, but at least throw it out there for council to consider. Looking at the agenda 7G tonight, the borough seems to be considering applying for a RAP-C development grant for 201 Sabine. And I guess, my first question is, what exactly does the council intend to do with this development grant? I guess what would it include as far as transfer of potentially this public property to a private entity? And if it was going to entail that, would the final plan be sent before the Orphans Court for review and approval pursuant to Pennsylvania's Donated or Dedicated Property Act? The second point I wanted to make was, one of the things that looking through the packet tonight, there's obviously been a lot of work on doing the traffic studies that have gone into 3 Elmwood. I guess the thing that I'm concerned about, does council have any sort of comprehensive plan to evaluate the traffic for all the development that seems to be on the agenda going forward? Obviously Narberth has limited amount of space for roads, and it seems, from everyone I've talked to in the Sabine Coalition, that traffic is a serious consideration, and the ongoing development. The last thing we want is for Narberth to basically become a gridlock parking lot. So those are the points I wanted to make tonight, and just throw those questions out there. And if you have an answer, I'd be glad to take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heffern. I will just point you to the meeting packet. There is a memo from the borough manager to the Finance and Administration Committee, and I believe it answers your question regarding the RICP.
So I don't know if I can do a quick follow-up. According to the packet, it said that there was no specific intent so far for the grant. And I didn't know if perhaps it was something apart from the memo that maybe council had in mind. And then, with regard to kind of the public, whether it be a transfer to a private entity is I know the Sabine Coalition's concern.
Those words are where we are as a council and where we are as a borough. That's the best information I have for you.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for attempting to answer my question.
Yep.
All right, we have Alexandra Singh.
Hello. Okay, I'm Alex Ting, and my address is 117 Woodside Avenue. And I'm 1 block away, basically, from that property, 3 Elmwood. And I'd like to make a comment about the long-term prospect of development versus preservation as a wild space. And I'm looking at it for all of Narberth, not just South Narberth, but it is the only open space in South Narberth. So it is really important that we have some kind of open space. I have several concerns. My most important concerns is that it is a floodplain. Right now, and with climate change, it's going to become more and more obvious that the whole property is basically a floodplain, and you shouldn't be building on that. We're using standards that have been in effect for a long time, and things are changing rapidly. The other thing is the traffic safety. Regardless of the traffic studies, those studies can be swayed one way or the other to make a point, but from observation, that is a very dangerous road, and the egress and the access roads are not safe. They're just not safe, and they don't make any sense. So I don't think there's really a very practical way to develop that property. So I'm opposed to any development of that property. And I would like to ask the borough, and maybe in partnership with Lower Merion, hopefully, Township to actively pursue getting government grants, donors, do fundraising campaigns, whatever you can do to get the money together to purchase that part of the property from the owner so that the owner has some income from that, or make some kind of arrangement, maybe an easement or something, but that so that the owner has some financial advantage, and then also the community has an advantage from it. And I don't think so far that has happened. I think that I don't see a real dedicated effort, long-term effort to make that kind of thing happen. And we need to do that not only for this property, but for other open spaces in the borough. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, next we have Jean Dura.
Hi, Jean Borak. I'm at 510 North Essex Avenue. So in advance of the parking task force report as an agenda item for tonight, I just wanted to put forward a comment as a member of the task force. I've heard from many members of the Narberth community about a common sense of frustration about the lack of action after the Narberth parking study was completed 4 years ago. The parking study was comprehensive, expensive, and presented many ideas on improving parking management within the borough, many of which have not seen much traction in the past 4 years. Tonight, our discussion and work this past year with Monco Planning and the members of the Parking Study Task Force comes to a conclusion, and Matthew Popek of Monco will present a prioritized list of recommendations. And moving forward beyond the report, I am strongly urging the borough to create formal policies to facilitate a bias for action in putting the recommendations to work, as well as a willingness to experiment and adjust as necessary. I want to emphasize how much the borough would greatly benefit from a formal, proactive policy and process that identifies the potential solutions and test and collect data. This is to counter the current bias towards being reactive and stymied by public resistance to change. For this to happen in the context of parking management, I think the borough needs to, 1, conduct periodic and consistent data collection. 2, set clear, measurable parking goals, for example, peak utilization rates, average turnover rates. And 3, actively manage site-specific parking problems through some adjustment of pricing, regulations, or enforcement. I hope that you will take this perspective into thoughtful consideration as you hear our recommendations. Many thanks for your time and dedication to improving our community and the experience of living in our town.
Thank you very much.
All right, and then the next one is labeled Wayne B is the iPad, so please definitely state your name for the record.
Okay. Yes, hi. This is Deborah Lonsdorf. The name is L-O, N as in Nancy, S as in Sam, D as in David, O-R, F as in Frank. And I don't know how to change my name on here. Sorry about that. So I had written a letter to council, but I did want to just read the same thing here, if I could, to the community. I'm writing to ask that council votes no on any development on 3 Elmwood Avenue. I think the area should be left as open space. It's on a floodplain, and as the floods worsen, any homes built there will be at risk. I'm concerned that there could be a lawsuit that the borough is named in by a homeowner whose home is affected. They will name the borough, the Lower Merion Township, and the builders for negligence in some fashion for even allowing this project to move forward when the environmental issues have been made so clear to everyone. Why would we allow this when a hazard can clearly be shown? Another issue is the clear danger presented from the egress and ingress to the property, which is not worth the risk. No one's life or the life of their child can be overlooked as a part of the danger of the development of homes there. No one I have seen in the borough is in support of this project, except perhaps the homeowners who would stand to make a profit. There's an idea afoot that the borough and Lower Merion Township purchase the land and create an open space park, which I would be in favor of. We can plant amazing native trees and shrubs and support the environment even further, as the way the borough has been doing with other initiatives. We have a wonderful, if bold, opportunity here that I urge you to consider. The cost could be lower, as a developable lot is worth more than one that isn't. Create a park for the families who've invested here, and it would be a boon to the borough. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, now we have Maureen McGeehan.
Yep.
Hi, thank you. My apologies for not having a working camera tonight. I'm Maureen McGeehan. I'm speaking on behalf of the Lower Merion Conservancy. The Conservancy is an environmental nonprofit focused on protecting the streams and open space in Narberth and Lower Merion. The Conservancy keeps an eye on new development applications and weighs in on plans that could cause significant harm to the environment and the historic fabric of our community. We know that some development is inevitable, so we save our comments for applications that present the most potential for harm. We believe the proposed plan at 3 Elmwood Avenue is a project that would cause serious problems for the environment and the people living downstream from the project. Virtually all of our local streams are impaired because clean water was not a priority when our area was developed. The stone walls channelizing the stream on this property are proof of that. Nearby houses were built in and around the stream, contributing to flooding, exacerbating the stream bed erosion, and degrading the water. We cannot remove the existing houses or relocate Wynwood Road, but we can avoid repeating mistakes by preventing this development. As precipitation rates continue to increase, our stormwater management systems need to have the resiliency to adapt. The Conservancy is concerned that a system designed to hold and slowly release water, like the one proposed at 3 Elmwood, would have less ability to filter out pollutants from the proposed structures than an infiltration-based system. The site's proximity to the floodplain makes the functionality of the system essential. The Conservancy is very concerned about how the system will reduce runoff and mitigate flooding should rainfall events last multiple days or events occur back to back. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation awarded the Conservancy $279,000 for stormwater-related work near the 3 Elmwood site. Much of that funding was put towards a 2019 stream restoration project in Shortridge Park, which would be negatively impacted by the proposed development. Remediation and restoration efforts are important, but the most effective way to conserve is to protect existing open space. Preventing development at 3 Elmwood Avenue would be a valuable step towards protecting our waterways and preparing for future floods. The Conservancy encourages council to deny the development application for 3 Elmwood Avenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so it looks like I don't see any other raised hands on Zoom, so it's kind of like a final call for anyone who wants to make a comment. All right, I don't see any further public comment.
Can I just say that if this was,
I'm sorry, Mr. Grove, everyone had one chance. We're gonna close public comment. Thank you. All right, we'll move to 6A, and we'll take a presentation on the Narberth Parking Study Task Force.
Sure.
Great.
Presentation that will load up.
Thought that was the thought that was the right one. We'll try one more time there.
Samantha's getting that ready. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. Members of the public, Borough Council, Borough staff. My name is Matthew Popek. I am the Transportation Planning Assistant Manager with the Montgomery County Planning Commission. And I am tasked with bringing this final piece of the Parking Study Task Force to its conclusion. It's been nearly a 10-month effort at this point, and we are happy to finally see it coming before you tonight. On the next slide, I'll give a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about tonight. We're going to go through what the task force's objectives and goals were during the 4 public meetings that they had back in the winter and spring of 2021, as well as the areas that we ended up covering over the different meeting topics. And then I will hope to present some of the recommendations list to you and talk through a little bit of the final report. If anyone has questions or additional items that they would like to talk about at that point, we're be happy to answer some of them. On the next slide, I would just like to recognize the members of the Parking Study Task Force. You already heard from Jean Borough tonight. Thank you very much to Jean, Garrett, Abe, Pat, Iden, Lisa, Cindy, from the members of the public and the borough staff and officials, Michelle, Andrea, Michelle, and Matt, and of course to Samantha for helping to bring this to its conclusion as we got here towards the end. On the next slide, it's a little bit smaller in terms of the font that's available, but just to work through exactly what the objectives of this task force was in the first place. We were trying to truly understand the recommendations that were put forth in that Nelson Nygaard study that Jean mentioned that was completed back in 2017. Going through the current enforcement, some of the availability and distribution of how all the parking works in the borough, both on street and off street, and how the parking study itself relates to Narborough's comprehensive plan. We were looking to analyze some of the impacts of potential changes that might happen. The bar's a little bit through, so I'll just read that off quickly. The availability and convenience of parking, the prices, safety of general roadways overall throughout the borough, including where parking is already present on residential streets. Simplicity versus complexity of how parking works and how it is understood throughout the borough. Some of the administrative burdens that takes place just in terms of the borough trying to work through an entire parking permit process. The fairness to overall residents, and of course the impact on businesses. And we would like to, hopefully through this task force, we wanted to prepare a recommendation summary for council, which you should have in your packets tonight. Fitting within the existing regulatory structure, making sure that it was compatible with what was already existing enforcement mechanisms, and presenting these actionable recommendations in a menu of choices so that the borough can choose what needs to be filed and followed first off. The next slide is our goals. We had 3 broad-based goals, I would say. On the next slide.
Sorry.
There we go. Looking at the parking program itself, how it can be changed, times, from fees, from different areas of the boroughs, from wayfinding to help direct particular members of the public or customers coming to shop at businesses downtown, and the management of how all of those resources kind of fit together. That was the first goal. The second one was to look a little bit more into the street designs of many of Narborough's residential streets themselves and see if there could be a system set up to accommodate both parking on the streets as well as travel, bicycle movements, pedestrian movements, everything else that demands from a particular 30 to 40 foot wide cartway in a particular area. And finally, the policy and implementation goals, trying to figure out if we can say, these are the items that you should attack first as borough council, as borough administration and staff, and trying to identify who would be responsible for this and figuring out, as Jean mentioned, to really be a bias for action as we are standing here. The discussion topics that we had over the 4 different meetings, as I mentioned, this effort actually kicked off last December with the previous MCPC staff person, Simon Narborough, Maggie Dobbs. She has since taken another job in another county, but I helped to step in starting in the January meeting. The December meeting was kind of an introduction and an overview of the current conditions for parking throughout Narberth. In January, we discussed the zones and possible pricing changes for both residential and commercial parking. In February, we worked through that streets items of design that I mentioned on the last slide, trying to figure out how to make as many people able to get through streets as much as possible on some of these narrower, not necessarily up to full-blown current standards wide streets. And then in March, we talked about the final pieces of it, working through that parking management and trying to pull together the recommendations table that we will see in just a moment. So the final product that was supposed to come out of this task force in the first place was a summary prepared and presented to council, which I believe we have done, to identify some of the challenges and opportunities and either reinforcing those that have been identified in the parking study or some of the new ideas that came up from borough staff and administration discussions and the parking study task force members themselves. We worked through some of the steps, policies, and other phase improvements recommended by the task force and put them into this final report, as again, should be available in both your packets and hopefully posted publicly for borough residents to look at some point. So we finally sent out this recommendations list, a total of, I believe, 21 or 22 different recommendations. As I mentioned, it came from 3 different sources, the original Nelson Nygaard study back from 2017, some of the original conversations we had with borough staff, and the task force's suggestions themselves. We ended up sorting them 2 different ways, both by category and by priority of implementation. The 4 categories that we came up with were borough resources and information, things that the borough needs to just get a better handle on exactly what's out there right now. The parking operations and management, so how exactly parking is structured and enforced throughout the borough. The permit programs, be it residential or potentially commercial permits for parking spaces in very high demand areas, and street topologies. It came up in the task force assessments themselves. There may be certain parts of the borough where, even though parking is generally recognized as a scarcity, certain areas may even need it to become a little bit more scarce in order for the entire complete streets ideas and availability of everybody to move through the borough as much as possible in order to make all of that work. So we've identified those 4 different categories, and then how they have been broken up now into tiers, and we'll run through the tiers briefly in a moment, both by priority for how the task force viewed that these particular suggestions should get implemented, and by a rough magnitude order of cost, trying to determine a high, medium, and a low. In most cases, the low cost ones are basically things that may take a little bit of borough staff time, but for the most part are things that are more policy driven, I guess, trying to drive it at that, how exactly the borough is enforcing things. Medium costs may be taking a little bit more time and more effort for study, whether it's borough staff and administration taking time to do it, or an additional outside consultant that is brought in, once again, to study something. And then the high cost ones are really the things that are going to take up a significant chunk of NARBOR's capital budget, possibly over 1 year, possibly over multiple years. So all of that is, of course, organized in here. So on the next page, you will see we have this very colorful list. The colors are the different categories, and then we have it sorted into various priorities of high, medium, and low priority, and low, medium, and high costs. Since the entire report is available in your packet, I wanted to spend probably the most time going through the top tier recommendations. So basically our top 5 greatest hits, if you were. If nothing else happens out of this parking study, if you're going to go after anything, we would recommend these 5 items that are on the next slide here. And I'll read them off for the people in the back of the room. On the next slide.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
The number 1 would be to compile the full list of current street parking policies. It came up a number of times throughout the task force meetings that there is no master list or master ordinance item that says, this particular section or this particular block of this particular street in the borough has this set of parking regulations. It's been, slowly formed over time as a mishmash, or certain property owners getting particular dispensations. Having one final list that can be referenced for everything else that the borough may decide to do as it seeks to adjust its parking policies would probably be our top recommendation. You need to know what you have before you make any large scale changes off of it. Number 2 would be revise the residential permit parking and structure. It was generally agreed amongst the parking study task force that the current $5 per year residential permit parking is probably too low, especially for the amount of demand that a lot of these residential permit streets end up getting. Where exactly the price goes to, we leave as an exercise for council. It should be part of the discussion amongst the public itself. Some of the numbers and cost ideas that were tossed out as an idea ranged in the $20 to $25 a year area, which would be comparable to a lot of other municipalities that have similar style residential parking permits to Narberth. But we definitely recognize from the task force perspective that that's going to be a much longer discussion and debate probably through a number of different committees. So we have it as number 2, but it's not something that is going to be up to this task force to necessarily nail down and decide. Number 3 was to revise the parking meters for usage and pricing and timing. There's all sorts of different meters. Some of the meters downtown are for 2 hours. A couple of blocks away, you have meters for 10 hours. If the borough is able to take the data for when and how these meters are getting used, how to encourage some of the turnover of these spaces throughout the day, and make sure that the commuter parking is separate from the employee parking, is separate from the residential parking, is separate from the customer parking. Meters are definitely should be used, I would argue, in setting a neighborhood such as this. But exactly how it takes place is something that once you have the entire listing of policies down and you know exactly how the residential permit should be shaking out, that's when we would argue moving to number 3 and adjusting how the meters work. Number 4 would be expanding partnerships with businesses and municipal lots. There's a number of different businesses not too far away from downtown that have parking lots. Whether there would be chances for off-peak parking when the businesses are closed in order to allow for sharing of parking and making sure that everyone isn't necessarily driving around everywhere else trying to find spaces. It would be something that would have to be explored and possibly in partnership with business one at a time. But the task force believed that it was one of the more important things to do and would be one of the cheaper options to implement. It could just be a casual phone call or conversation to allow the borough to start pushing parking in that particular area. That would be number 4 on our list. And the final one, as I believe Jean mentioned, is regularly monitor all of the available parking data between the parking violations and the system that's been purchased to read license plates for vehicles that are getting tickets, to how the meters are getting used now, to how the residential permits are getting used now. It kind of goes off of that number 1 step of making sure you know what you have in the first place. You also need to know what data you are collecting, how your system is getting used, so that it can be monitored and adjusted over time. On the next couple of slides, we'll run through just very briefly. I'll mention the different tiers. The second tier of items are generally higher priority, but they might have a little bit higher of a price tag to implement, as well as some of the medium priority, but still lower cost recommendations. They include improving current parking signage, further developing the parking wayfinding system throughout the borough, establishing standards for redesigning of streets when it is particularly requested by a given block, and creating the transparent street redesign process so that you know how a street is going to get redesigned and how it takes to get it triggered by a given residential area. Establishing permit zones instead of necessarily just having either one complete permit zone covering the entire borough or only allowing for permits and parking spaces in front of a particular house. Simplifying some of the downtown regulations for parking, updating the zoning code to refine some of the parking requirements that might be possible, and to consider possible commercial permit parking. As I mentioned earlier, the residential one is definitely a successful one. There could be instances where a commercial user might want to have a space available for them near the business, or just be able to stop by for a pickup and drop off in a particular spot. So those are the second tier of recommendations. The third tier is the medium priority that is probably a little bit more in terms of cost, including rebranding, parking enforcement overall, advancing bicycle facilities throughout borough streets. We're talking about that with a number of different municipalities, exactly how to make a community fully bicycling friendly. Designating and refining the permitting streets, which may take, replacement of signage for 2-hour permit parking and things like that. Medium priority, but could need a little bit more investment from the borough in the first place. Determining the parking demand that has come from recent developments, which would help to potentially inform how the zoning code could get redeveloped and changed a little bit. Improving the overall pedestrian interface with parking, anything from more heavily painted crosswalks, protected bump outs, additional pedestrian signs with rapid flashing beacons or reflectors, all sorts of ways to make the pedestrian experience a little bit more safe and comfortable to make sure that people aren't getting hit from people pulling into parking spaces. And also the final one in this one was exploring potential circulation changes. There are a number of one-way streets in the borough. They could potentially be reworked, potentially go to two-way, potentially changing different routes. It would take a much larger traffic study than this particular task force was prepared to go after, but it did come up as a suggestion from the task force for a couple of particular areas. So we would potentially recommend looking into that as part of the third tier. And then finally, on the fourth tier, 3 items that were ranked as, I guess, low priority overall, but still were worthwhile suggestions to bring up or coming from the study themselves. And those 3 are developing a reserved space application process. So beyond the commercial parking permit, something to go for a handicapped accessible permit, an electric vehicle, a oversized vehicle, potentially even work crews for construction projects like I've seen out on the borough tonight. It would be a lower priority because it's not nearly as widespread, I guess, but in a borough that is truly thinking about all of its parking issues, it might be something that gets included. The second one on this one is compiling a full list of properties with driveways. Part of the zoning code, is talking about how many parking spaces you have on your property, and it came up during our discussions that it might be that some residences that don't have a driveway or a garage need to have space on the street in order to park a personal vehicle. There just wasn't a good sense of exactly which properties where were able to do that. So as part of the overall borough updating all of their property records for everything, some sort of the notion about where the driveways were and which residences were necessarily part of those would be one of the other items for borough staff to take under. And then the final one, it's on here, but it is a low priority and would be fairly expensive, would be upgrading the parking payment technology itself. So that would be going away from the individual kiosk meters at each space, more towards a 1 kiosk per block. Potentially could allow for charging by phone, recharging by phone, just going the next level into coming up with different technology. That's certainly going to be an expensive proposition for the borough. But it was part of the original study, and we wanted to make sure that it was included as part of these recommendations. I believe that is all I have. I want to once again thank the task force, and I know a couple of them are on the phone tonight, for all of their assistance and hard work in trying to put this together. This is not an easy process to go through the study and try and sort through exactly what pieces of the overall transportation puzzle in Narberth really need to get attacked and addressed first. But I certainly appreciate their help, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that Borough Council may have regarding this overall study and where we hope you all go from here.
Thank you so much. Questions, council members?
Thank you so much for the presentation. I have several questions, and some are about the Nelson Nygaard study and how you looked at it.
Okay.
Some are about role of the task force, and then I have just some questions for you about like sort of your best professional advice on how we might proceed.
I'll do my best.
So So I'm just gonna go in order the top 5 recommendations.
Okay.
The first one was to create a full list of current policies for
Yes.
the roads and roadways. I believe in the Nelson Nygaard study, the recommendation was that we just simply like bypass that and scrap them, remove the signs and create 3 zones.
Mhm.
What did the task force, why did the task force recommend this interim step that actually is gonna be pretty much of a pretty big lift versus just say the implementation of the Nelson Nygaard 3-zone methodology?
I would certainly defer to any other members that were on this as well. My recollection was it was more of they didn't want to completely scrap everything that was in place and start over again. There was the feeling that a lot of the particular eccentricities, if you will, of the various parking regulations and policies have developed over time for reasons. And perhaps some of those reasons still are valid, and throwing them all babies out with bathwater might not be the smoothest way to get buy-in, I guess, from the entire borough public. It is certainly an idea to move just straight up and say, let's go to 3 zones, 2 north of the tracks and 1 south. That I think was part of a little bit later of a recommendation as to whether that should be pursued. But I always am a firm believer in really knowing and understanding what you have before tossing everything away and starting fresh.
Okay, yeah, it was just, I'm not saying that I'm advocating for the Nelson Nygaard solution. I understand the task force gave some consideration to it.
Right.
So I was more, I guess, I didn't see their solution as throwing everything out. I saw it as like they had examined patterns of use, they had collected a lot of data, they had looked at the way in which our current parking situation, and then they, as professional parking consultants, made a recommendation to restructure it in that way.
Right.
So it's just
Yeah, I think that
this
is known as a
I was hoping we had gotten further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Understandable. And I think there were plenty of pieces from that Nelson Nygaard study that I think are directly should be implementable. But this came from the task force. This was let's not scrap everything without looking.
And then the second item was the reuse of permitting structure, the revision of the permitting structure, which would be, I guess there would be a fee for a commuter, a fee for an employee, a fee for a customer, a fee for a resident. It's a separate type of permit, which makes sense. Is there a role for the task force in doing the deeper dive that would be required to advise the council on the appropriate set of fees? Because I guess I'd like to ask the council president, manager, Bryant, that we ask, if it's appropriate, to ask the task force to just go a little further and get more specific on making that recommendation and looking at what research needs to be done to advise us on permitting structure, fees, et cetera.
Yeah.
So we don't have to kind of churn on that any longer. We can just put it in place.
So on behalf of the task force, and I know probably other people want to respond to this too, they did do some deeper research. I will give them that. That was the credit for saying, I think it was Jenkins County, $20 a year resort, a couple of boroughs in Delaware County at 25. We didn't settle on a number. There were a few members of the task force that thought the price per year should be much higher. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree. Going from a $5 a year parking permit to, I'm going to pull a number out of an air here, $100 a year, maybe a bit of a surprise overall. And council, I think it was viewed that council is the best ones to, be accepting all of the public comment that may be coming in and determining it. I think the task force didn't want to truly make that decision for you.
Okay, so Matthew, I would just say to the council, having spent a lot of time in council discussions and decision-making, that I think we were looking to the residents who serve on the task force to help us, at least bring us into some range of acceptability for the community.
Maybe what you're not asking for is a range, but sort of a summary of bans
Mhm.
that were possibilities that were discussed.
Thank you, just,
so then
just
you
so
can
that we
follow.
have a starting point, so because
So-
we could churn, I mean, certainly there's 7 of us, we could churn on it for as long as the task force did.
Right.
With all the same, and repeat all the same thinking, and all the same suppositions and ideas, and so I think we were hoping for a recommendation.
So the report
Yeah.
says the general consensus should be $20 to $25 per year.
Okay,
And I
for
think
a
that's-
residential permit.
Yes.
And then did you think about a tiered permit structure with commuter permits, say, we don't have this currently. We don't have
Correct.
separate permits for commuters or
Correct.
employees or customers, but
Correct.
I mean, customers, obviously use parking meters. Employees currently are using parking meters, commuters are currently using parking meters too, but it is conceivable that we could put in place a kind of a commuter permit that could generate revenue for the borough and, for people. So do you see where I'm going with that? Are you
Yeah,
stopping me from
yeah.
my Q&A here? or-
Yeah, if I could just kind of.
Sure.
Here. To your point, Vice President Weisford, I think exactly, we could spend all night, many more nights, talking about the specifics of parking. I think, in my opinion, the next step to ensure forward progress on this report and ensure action and all that on it is for council to designate, well, first of all, council needs to approve the report that's, or make any comments or changes. But once a report has been approved, I think what the task force has done so far has been great to move us on to this next step, which is designating some body, whether it's continuing the parking study task force, maybe without MCPC being so involved in it, and maybe having other borough staff involved in it, or whether it's one of the borough subcommittees like infrastructure, to actually go through these recommendations and come back to borough council with the specific recommendation that council then can then kind of coalesce around.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. I just want to encourage the council and you to include the membership of that task force, because they already know what they've done. And they know which discussions they've had over and over and over again, so that we don't have to redo the work.
Right.
And I really appreciate that they've done a lot of research and they've had a lot of conversations. So we want to harvest all of that and not start over again. Yeah.
If I may, I participated in the, I was on the task force.
Yeah.
I don't know that there was a real consensus on the parking, because some people wanted more and other people want less, and they were coming at it from all angles. So it was hard to pick a particular consensus or a range, because people were coming at it from very different angles.
So I think that's an area where having those buckets of opinions summarized.
Right.
Then it comes to council to make a policy decision, policy by policy.
Right.
And then we can work through them until we have a sort of a final policy that would be up for adoption.
The other, I just appreciate the organization that you did, the 5, and and the others, and the hierarchies and the cost implications of those. It's just an excellent job. But thank you so much. I have no further.
Other council members?
Aaron, I do on Zoom if everyone's done in the room.
Ready for you.
Okay. So I really appreciate the high, medium, low priority, and just really want to underscore what I think is the importance of really coming up with this parking permitting system before folks move into all of the development and the apartments that we see being built. I'm sorry, folks. I think my headphones just died. Aaron, wave me down if you lose me. Okay. So for example, we said at 114 Forest, neighbors were concerned that, look, this is a street that really doesn't have any driveways. We're having these apartments. What if folks have more cars than they do the allotted space in the apartment? At the time, I was chair of then the Public Works Committee. And I said, well, this is why we need very clear parking permit. So people are going to rent an apartment knowing I am not eligible to park my car if I have an additional vehicle on the streets of Narberth. So I'm going to have to park at Staples and walk to my apartment. And I would just underscore the importance of establishing those clear permits before we do see new neighbors and residents move into these new properties.
Thank you, Councilman. I mean, Narberth's variety is its strength, and that's part of why a comprehensive collection of all policies that are going on is going to be important, because you're going to have individual cases like that one is mentioned, and it might be completely different from something just a block to a.
Thanks.
Anything, Councilor Pananopoulos?
Sure, yeah, thank you, Matt, and I'm sorry I can't be there. I didn't want to come to the meeting when I was feeling sort of sick because I thought the room would be crowded and it would not be responsible. So thanks for bearing with me not being there, and great job on everything, Matt, and the presentation. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I think that you said it correctly. I mean, the task force was specifically drawn from the community with an eye to having diverse opinions, to having folks who live in different parts of the borough who have different relationships to the parking in the streets, so that we could really say that we had sort of thoroughly vetted the parking study through a representative community group, and at least set some upper and lower boundaries, some general framework. But at this point, I think what Samantha said is really the bottom line. It's, in order to move this forward, it's time to delegate this to a body. I don't know that the parking study task force members are available to come back and do this work, nor do I think that would necessarily work well. But to probably a subcommittee or a committee, existing committee, or a subgroup of council in conjunction with the administration, to just sit down and just put something specific, start putting specific recommendations for council to vote on, so we can just move it forward. I mean, I think that's really the only thing left to do.
Thank you, Michelle. And to that end, I would like to appoint an ad hoc committee specifically to come to the council with recommendations for a parking policy. And I think enough work has been done here that can be on a fairly short schedule. I will solicit thoughts of interest from council members. If they would like to participate, it will be a 3-member body following the meeting, and then at the first meeting of October, we'll convene the committee. Thank you. Any other questions regarding parking? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Appreciate your time, and I want to thank all of the committee members who volunteered to help with something particularly technical and complex. And I also want to specifically call out Councilmember Pananopoulos, who took this under her. Councilmember Panelopoulos is the member at the table who made sure that this study wasn't paid for and filed, that it would actually continue to move forward. And that's a benefit to all of us. So thank you, Michelle. Sorry you can't be here today.
Thanks, Aaron. Thank you for supporting the task force also. I think that they did a great job, and thanks to the members of the task force.
Thank you. All right, we'll move to 7, which is our consent agenda. There are 2 items being removed.
Yes, thank you, Council President. In discussion with the Borough Solicitor, I would like to remove items J and K, the 2 ordinances to be approved from the consent agenda, and move them to the action agenda.
All right, they will be moved. Well, I'll take a motion to amend the agenda for 7J to become 8E, and for 7K to become 8F. I have a motion.
So moved as a single motion.
Seconded. Any discussion on the amendment to the agenda? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. We have enough votes in the room, so I will consider that approved. All right. Thank you. So with that, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda as written, A through M, without J and K?
I move that we approve the consent agenda, A through M, without J and K.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor McGreevy. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, it is unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to 8A. Can I get a motion to consider the facility use agreement with the Legion?
Sure. I move the Borough Council approve facility use agreement with the American Legion.
Second?
I'll second it.
Seconded. It's on the table. Discussion. Anything from you, Manager Bryant?
So the agreement is unchanged from last month's discussion, given that council requested a month to further consider it. I haven't had any communication with the American Legion since last month. given that I didn't have any direction from Borough Council.
Okay.
So it's the same agreement as last month. Again, just to kind of give a brief synopsis of what we talked about last month for everyone's memory and benefit. Currently the space, the east portion of the community building at 80 Windsor has historically been used by the American Legion. However, the borough, as with many organizations, has previously had no written agreement governing the use of that space. This agreement is an attempt to get a written agreement down as requested by the borough's liability insurer. And, this agreement does differ considerably from the Girl Scout agreement Council just approved. And it does differ considerably with the agreement with New Horizons that Borough Council approved last month, reflecting the discussions that I've had with the American Legion. So it's for Council's consideration and whatever direction you all want to go with it. Of course, I will, carry it out and we'll communicate with the Legion about it.
Okay, Mr. Bush.
So we had a discussion of this in the FNA meeting, and we had a disagreement on the members there. The issue that came up was that the American Legion is requesting the storage of parade rifles on the property. There's currently, in the agreements that we're making with groups, they're currently not allowed to store firearms, so they're requesting an exemption from that to store their parade rifles. And Cindy and Bob had there's a disagreement over whether that's an appropriate use of borough property, storage of firearms, whether that should be, other than the police station, of course, whether those should be stored on borough property.
Okay.
I could just add a quick comment. Thank you for summarizing, Fred. I'd like to, I think in general practice, we should not allow for weapons or ammunition to be stored on borough property. But given out of the respect for the Legion and the veterans and the Memorial Parade and all that they do, I'd like to ask that the American Legion members partner with our Narberth police to arrange to have any parade rifles or ammunitions safely stored in our police department, so that when folks or community members are in fact renting that community space, even though they are locked and stored safely, we don't have community members in a place, in a space where there's guns and ammunition, that we can honor them and their organization and still have all guns and ammunition stored safely across the parking lot in our police department.
Okay, other thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say just tag on to Cindy that Cindy, I think that's a thoughtful suggestion. And I would just amend it slightly to say that why not allow them to continue to store their ceremonial weapons and exactly as they're currently doing, and then ask if our police department would be willing to simply supervise that and make sure that it's,
It's their standards.
meets the chief's standard of care. And that because I think for my whole life the Legion has been doing what they're doing, and out of respect for the Legion and the members and their service to the country, I think I don't see why we would ask them to do anything differently than they've been doing. And I don't be surprised if they're storing ammunitions or dangerous materials there, but that would be for our police department to determine if it was a safe condition, but allow them to continue to as an act of respect to do what they're doing.
And so, just as a point of information to this discussion, Chief, not to put you on the spot, so a non-answer is an acceptable answer. Is that something your department would feel comfortable taking on?
Yeah, I can see the arguments from both sides. To be quite upfront, I think one of the concerns that I would have is, preferring the latter as Bob is basically exercising there, is that I would like to go see the infrastructure in which they're stored. Does it meet certain standards according to a safe?
the fireproof, the waterproof, the durability, the structure, the infrastructure that they have, the access control that's going to be over there for the plastic alarm, if who has access to the facility. There's a whole host of questions without getting into the minutia that would really prefer a conversation, with myself, and representative obviously of Legion Management, American Legion Management, to talk about. So I think overall, I can see the arguments for the other side. We probably have to work out some details if they were stored in the police department. That could muddy waters in different ways. But I think overall, the first approach would be to go see what type of infrastructure that they're willing to provide to make sure that there's a safe environment for those firearms. And if they're parade, if they're honor guard type weapons, there's other options and alternatives that we can look at as well in terms of those weapons, different than a regular firearm. So we just require further conversation between myself and American Legion Management to understand a little bit better what the expectations are.
Any thoughts from other council members? Thank you, Chief.
I just am curious about whether there's anything that our insurance company would say about this from a liability standpoint. And that's where I have a concern.
Yeah, so pending any, this agreement has been shared with our liability insurer, and there were no comments, no questions or comments about it.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. I'm surprised.
But does this agreement that we're looking at right now allow them to store the guns, or does it?
It does.
It does,
yes.
okay.
That's your answer.
I'm surprised, but that's
So
okay.
I would be more comfortable if the ammunition were not stored on site. If they stored, if they wanted to store parade rifles, that the ammunition is not stored on site. A reasonable compromise.
Could we take the recommendation of the chief after he spent time?
Well, so I think one thing that is possible at the table tonight would be for someone to make an amendment to the ordinance that we're proposing. And to say that they would be granted the exception to be able to store firearms, contingent upon the approval of the chief of police, which ultimately sort of goes to the mayor's approval through, her professional staff. And so then that power really rests with the mayor and the police, and at some future date it's deemed to be substandard, well, then that sort of gives an active power to do what is necessary.
As mayor, I'm willing to work with you guys, whatever you're comfortable.
Does that hold water?
Yeah, this is a agreement that is being negotiated, so essentially council could give borough staff the ability to come up with that type of language to amend the agreement to take that back to the committee.
Yeah. Okay. Would someone like to make such an amendment?
I don't know if we necessarily need a formal amendment. I think if there's a consensus
to
of
the
council,
motion? Okay, fine.
then yeah, we'll just bring back
Well,
a new agreement.
I'm trying to find out if there is a consensus. of council. Yeah.
So moved, if you get a second, we can plan.
Okay.
All right, so are they gonna be able to use the space for now? If we don't agree to this, right, if we say we're gonna amend it, that just leaves them in limbo, or that?
Oh, that would, yeah. The agreement I have with them right now, is that they're not to use the space until council, well, not for Legion purposes, but they're not to rent the space out until we have this agreement sorted out.
But how about if we were to put some words together tonight, like very similar to what Aaron just said, and just, write that into the agreement tonight and
That's the
approve
idea.
it, so that, that was the idea. So
I don't think you need to have the exact wording.
I think
staff is sophisticated enough that we can take what you're saying and incorporate that.
So then we
if I make,
incorporate
if I say so moved, and we have a motion to incorporate that, and if we do have a second, and then.
Right, so
you could approve this agreement tonight with those amendments. Say we approve this agreement, but with that addition regarding no information on site, and that the area that the parade guns are stored to be reviewed and approved by.
So I think that the amendment was just sort of to the satisfaction of the chief of police regarding safe storage.
So just that.
Just keep it simple.
I just have one liability question with regard to this. If, God forbid, somebody breaks in and there's a problem with anything with any of those guns or somebody gets hurt, does having us, having our police review the safety put us on liability, on the hook for liability potential?
I think that it would make us less liable because we took reasonable steps to ensure that we're doing what we need to do.
Okay.
In order to keep it secure.
Okay.
Okay.
Just to clarify, I'm sorry, one more question, Aaron. So we currently, there's ammunition, there are weapons, and we are not renting, we being the borough we do not have control of who that room is getting rented to.
That was the old situation. Right now, there is a moratorium on rentals until this agreement is resolved.
Well, correct. And that's actually what I think is part of my issue as well. Is not only do we have the weapon issue, but we also, this is the only property where we are relinquishing renting control. So we don't know. Andrew, to your point, yes, there's a liability question. And I think as elected officials, that's one of the first questions that we ask. But there's also that second kind of moral obligation of that we're next to a playground and a library. So I'm even more hesitant to pass this, given the fact that we don't even know who's renting that space. We had discussed that any type of rental of that property would have to go through the emergency management just to assure that COVID precautions were being maintained. Was something that we discussed, that again, that since we are relinquishing control of renting that property, that we don't know if COVID protocols that we are enacting in our own borough, other property are being maintained in that space. So I think there's some safety concerns that we really still have an obligation to iron out until we rent this property, or allow an organization to rent this property rather.
So
Question, clarification for Samantha and John, to Cindy's point, because I think, although I'm the one who asked to table this so we could give it a little bit of a closer look last month. I'm not particularly fond of an agreement which permits any third party. And it's not the Legion, it's any third party to sort of have the ability to rent or lease borough property. But when I read subsection P here, it says permission to use, it says the user shall not be permitted to assign blah, 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 except for certain uses. But then it says permission to use or occupy the facilities shall be provided solely by the borough. So I think my understanding was that notwithstanding that the Legion might find somebody that wanted to rent it and sort of, I don't know, make some sort of a preliminary arrangement, ultimately it would have to go to the office, and that user would need to have permission, and they would need to sign a facilities use agreement with the borough. Is that understanding correct or incorrect? Because it sounded from what you just, sorry, from what you just said, Cindy, as though you were reading this as though the Legion would have the final say. And so I think just based on that ambiguity, we should probably come to a better understanding before we approve this.
Agreed. Thank you.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, that was actually, thank you for pointing that out. That was actually the section I was like desperately trying to find during our meeting last month when that question came up. I did have explicit verbal conversation with Legion management that the borough would be notified, and if the Legion was allowed to continue renting out the space, the compromise of sorts we came to is the borough would be required to be notified and approve those rentals.
But was there also either in Word in the document or in your discussion, the idea that the Legion would only be rented to Legion affiliated uses? No.
Yeah.
But the proceeds would only be used for the memorial, for the parade, and for the upkeep of the building. So it's all, yeah.
Yeah, again.
But I appreciate Michelle pointing that out too.
My recollection from the meeting was that the issue wasn't just who would give permission, but ensuring that the borough's policies were in place for those rentals. For example, the anti-discrimination policy, and also to ensure that there is a uniform charge, and that people weren't charged based upon the whim of who they were.
So,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, so quick question to clarify. I want to have a birthday party for someone in my family. If I'm looking at the east wing, or I'm sorry, the west wing, I call the borough office. If I'm looking at Borough Hall, I call the borough office. If I'm looking at the east wing, I call Legion Management.
That's correct.
No, that's, no, you could absolutely could call the borough office and schedule the East Wing, as my understanding. But perhaps also the East Wing would be, no, it's not the case that the East Wing would only be scheduled by the Legion. I don't see anything in the agreement to that effect. That's not my understanding of the arrangement.
The Legion the option, but it doesn't preclude the borough. And if the Legion and the borough has to provide.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so what's on the table for 8A is the use agreement is written with a modification that the firearms exception be granted contingent upon safety inspection by the Narberth Police and with the approval of the chief of police. So I'll call the question and ask for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. One opposition.
Cindy's.
The also, okay, 5-2. Thank you. All right, we'll move to 8B. Can I get a motion?
I move that we consider the preliminary land development application for 3 Elmwood Avenue.
Okay, thank you. Can I get a second? Thank you, Mr. Bush. I'll kick this off with an opportunity for Mr. Fromhold to make some brief comments on the thoughts that they have had since our last meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening to all of you. Our hope was this evening that we would have an opportunity to do more than simply make brief comments to you. As you know, we had met with you about a month ago and had, for the first time, discussed our preliminary plan application with you, and we're looking for feedback from you on some decision points with regard to what modifications might be made to that plan based on feedback that we had received from a number of various sources along the way. If I could take a couple of minutes here. First of all, we had our team here of Chris Yan, Kelly Gottschall, our client, the owner of the property you did hear from earlier this evening. And unfortunately, the timing of this application is that it is being considered for the first time in Lower Merion Township this evening by the commissioners. And we got a call about 10 minutes or so ago that the case was reached. So our team went there because this is the first time there will have been an explanation of the preliminary plan to the commissioners, where at least you heard our presentation last month. This has history to it, as you know. We have been working on this for a very long time. We had filed, because this property is in 2 municipalities, Lower Merion and Narberth, tentative sketch applications in both municipalities. There are mandatory tentative sketch requirements in both Lower Merion and in Narberth. And we were before the Planning Commission on a few occasions and had informal discussions with individual members of the Planning Commission before the tentative sketch was ever acted upon by the Planning Commission or by you. You may recall that when the plan was initially filed, there were 2 larger buildings that were proposed for this site. As a result of feedback that we had received, we responded, our client did, to reducing the mass of those buildings to 3 smaller buildings, which would contain 12 units. There was continued concern with the number of units and type of buildings and whatnot. And as a result of discussions that we had, joint Planning Commission meetings between Lower Merion and Narberth and discussions with individual members, that was reduced to 3 sets of twins. 3 beautiful buildings on this site with the corresponding reduction of parking and so forth. Those plans, tentative sketch, were recommended to you by the Planning Commission. A development of 3 sets of twins for this property. There were a host of conditions of approval that required subsequent action by our client, bicycle and pedestrian studies, a stream assessment study, and so forth. That was all done in connection with the submission of a preliminary plan. Same was true in Lower Merion Township. The township approved subject to a host of conditions. Those conditions were incorporated by Norbert into its tentative sketch approval. And it was based on that tentative sketch approval that we filed the preliminary plan. One of the things that was done in connection with the filing of that plan was to engage Kelly Gutschall of Land Studies. Now, Kelly, and I'm just going to read you a little, she was here this evening and was hoping to speak to you, and I hope she does get an opportunity to address you and explain the study. Have you seen, I don't know whether you have seen the study that she did, the assessment. That was submitted with the plans and should be part of the package of materials that's available to you when you review the application. She was going to walk you through that study and her conclusions. And I just tell you a little bit about stuff. We went and we got an expert, and I'm going to read just a tiny bit about Kelly. So you're going to congratulations to Land Studies President Kelly Gutschall for being honored. This is in 2019. With Women of Lifetime Achievement in Conservation through Penn Future, celebrating Women in Conservation Awards. The award celebrates the lifetime accomplishments of a remarkable woman who has made a difference by devoting significant parts of her life to protecting and enhancing southeastern Pennsylvania's natural greatness and for her tireless dedication to environmental advocacy. Kelly's diligent efforts and dedication to protecting and enhancing the natural assets of this region have equipped her with a suite of achievements. Through her 35-year career, she has helped pioneer the firm's science-based approach to ecological planning and design. Her extensive knowledge and experience in sustainable site planning, watershed planning, creating and managing ecologically diverse plant communities, alternative stormwater management, and restoration design have helped her guide the firm in exploring and finding solutions to some of its most challenging problems for our generation. So that's a little bit about Kelly. So we got somebody who was really top-notch to study this floodplain area so that we could come back with a plan for restoration and landscaping in that area, to rid that area, as she would have told you this evening, of a lot of invasive species. She was here to tell you about the wall and its stability and good condition. She was here to tell you also about the judgment call that would be made between the suggestion some have made as to whether you'd rip those walls out and restore what would be an attempt at the restoration of something that would have been closer to before those walls were installed, and the relative benefit of that. She would have also told you that this area, this wetland area on this property, will be better after this development than it is now. And better, and certainly better than it would be going forward when you have the continued invasive species coming in. We have received reviews, zoning reviews, engineering reviews from your professional, Eric Johnson, who's with Pannoni Associates, and interestingly, Lower Merion Township's engineer, Joe Mastronaro, also with Pannoni Associates. We've been before the Planning Commission in Lower Merion, and we got a recommendation from the Planning Commission to approve this development. We also have a review from the Township Engineer in Lower Merion recommending a waiver with respect to the stormwater management requirements in Lower Merion Township. In Lower Merion, we do need a technical waiver that was reviewed by the township engineer and has been recommended by the township engineer. In fact, under the Lower Merion ordinance, the call on that waiver is for the engineer. And that recommendation is that it be granted. Here, and we addressed this issue with you last month, and I had written a letter to your borough manager and had copied Mr. Walko. I don't know whether you have seen it as part of your package. Our reading of the ordinance is no waiver is required. Nevertheless, Mr. Yan was here to address that stormwater issue on the assumption, as a lawyer would say, assuming arguendo, but on the assumption that the waiver is required and why it is appropriate that waiver be granted in this case, and why you should come to the same determination on that waiver as did Mr. Mastronardo of Pannoni Associates in Lower Merion Township. Lower Merion Planning Commission had recommended a whole list of conditions of approval. We had submitted them in our letter to Ms. Bryant and said that we're agreeable to those conditions in Lower Merion, and we're agreeable to those conditions being mirrored and agreed to here in Narberth as a condition of approval. We had also, as I said, submitted the letter to Samantha Bryant, and because Narberth Planning Commission has made a recommendation that this be denied, which I'm sure you're all familiar with that recommendation, there were no conditions that were formulated by the Planning Commission. In fact, in Narberth, I think historically, conditions haven't been formulated in the same way that they are by the planning staff, which is a large planning staff in Lower Merion Township, which are submitted to the Planning Commission and in turn to the commissioners. We had taken it upon ourselves, based on feedback that we had received from Planning Commission members, the Planning Commission, neighbors that we've heard, comments in the engineer's review and so forth, to offer certain modifications to the plan, which if they are things that you would like to see, we will do them. And we could do them either by conditions or by actually making modifications to the plan. Typically, I think the things that we're talking about here are suitable for conditions, but we could do either or a combination of both. We could show some on the plan or whatever. And most of them are minor, but let me just run through them quickly with you. As it relates to stormwater, one of the requirements was with the overflow. So we're saying that we would accept a condition that applicant shall convert the overflow from the rain garden to a spreader in lieu of the storm sewer pipe connection to the existing manhole. That request is made. That's a will comply. We'll certainly do that. The next was that we would remove 2 parking spaces and expand the rain garden area made available by their removal. There have been 2 schools of thought, as you may know, with respect to parking, because particularly in light of the location of this property, many properties have an on-street parking overflow alternative available to them. Not so much on this property, as you know. So therefore, we have wanted to keep some small element of additional parking spaces for guests that may come to the property from time to time. And so we would still have a small surplus if we lost 2 of them. I think we'd still have a surplus of 3. And what it would do, it would enable us to further expand the rain garden that we have at the property, and we are agreeable to doing that. Then there has been a question with regard to the lawn area within the floodplain area. I think there's been conflicting recommendations there. There's been some recommendation that there should be a walking trail through there, and then other recommendations that it ought to be natural and we ought to get rid of the mow zones. I think on balance, it probably would make sense, given all the concerns, just to get rid of the mow zones, so that it would be a no-mow area. So we would replace the oval lawn area shown on the landscape plan with additional no-mow area and suitable riparian plantings chosen to enhance stormwater management. So that it would work with those who would select the most suitable plantings for this area. And then there's been a question as to inspection. We would agree that we would provide and do so in a covenant periodic inspections that you would consider to be reasonable to make sure by a third party of all of the landscaping that would be installed as part of this development in that floodplain area. Turning to traffic, you heard from Frank Cavani last month, and Frank said that what we had proposed in our plan was safe. We're talking about 6 units. We're not talking about making less onto Montgomery Avenue or onto Haverford Avenue in the middle of town. We're talking about Wynwood Road. We're talking about homes. Frank said it's perfectly fine. Nevertheless, we're agreeable to making this right in and right out only and eliminating any left turns in, subject to PennDOT's approval. So what we think is a safe situation will only be further enhanced by agreeing that there would be no left turns in. And then there were questions with regard to the size of the loading space and the accessibility in the rear lot. We're willing to satisfy any of those requirements. If we feather space out, we would have slightly more impervious surface. If we tighten it up and so that the turning movements are a little tighter, we can reduce the impervious surface. There's a judgment call there as to what's the right balance. And we're happy to do what you like on that. I think in any case, we meet the satisfactory requirements, whether they're a little tighter, a little bit more easily accessible. The final thing we had here addressed pedestrian improvements. And there have been questions with respect to the signal timing and the light on the other side of the tunnel. And we're agreeable to working with PennDOT to optimize the cross time. Presumably, when that light was put in, that was studied, and a cross time was determined to be appropriate at that time. If because of any change in conditions or circumstances, there should be some adjustments to that, we're happy to work with PennDOT to do that. And then there were 3 matters that had come up. With regard to the bridge, there was a condition of this is the bridge at the bottom of Elmwood near Wynwood Road. There was a condition of tentative sketch approval that asked us to investigate that, not to spend a dime on it, but just to investigate what improvements might be done to it. And we did that. We had that meeting and so forth, and that was done, and there were certain things that were identified. Could you study it more? Could there be more studies? For sure, but we did what the condition required us to do. What we are agreeable to doing here is working with Narberth Borough to replace the deck and railings of the existing Elmwood pedestrian bridge, or make a fair, reasonable, so that would be on the developer to do that, or make a fair and reasonable cash contribution for bridge improvements. So if there wanted to be some additional investigation as to where you should spend your money as it relates to that bridge, we'd be willing to make a cash contribution in the amount that we would all consider to be fair and reasonable under the circumstances. And we would volunteer that and volunteer making that payment. That would require some discussion with you as to what would be appropriate for this development. But it would be a significant contribution. And then we had been informed by the planning staff in Lower Merion that there were some discussions between Narberth and Lower Merion as it relates to crossing Wynwood Road down near Woodside Avenue. That everyone was looking into that. How can we improve it, make it a little bit better, safer, more convenient for people to make that cross into Shortridge Park? And so in thinking about that and what we might do, realizing there are going to be 6 families that would live here, obviously a small number compared to all of those who would benefit from these improvements that we're talking about, but nevertheless, we have some new kids on the block here. So we said the applicant shall work with Lower Merion Township to install a pedestrian flashing warning sign at the intersection of Woodside Avenue and East Wynwood Road, or make a fair and reasonable cash contribution, the amount to be determined following discussion between the applicant and the borough for such improvement. I think technically that may be in Lower Merion Township. There may be a question as to what the legal rights are and who's got the jurisdiction of crossing, but it could be that some element of whatever is proposed would be in Norbert. It could be that some element of it is Lower Merion would be willing and agreeable to volunteer that contribution. And then with the same offer being made with respect to the crosswalk, enhancing the crosswalk at East Wynwood Road up near the tunnel. That had been a point of discussion as to the signal timing is one thing, but the crosswalk is another thing, and we would be agreeable to making that contribution. So where are we? This is before you. Were we to grant an extension, and let me say, we're very open to working with you. What we want to do is get this resolved. And I understand perfectly well what community reaction is to some of these developments, that if all the decisions were made on the community response, and their concerns are good because they actually help the process and have resulted in some of the things that we're volunteering here and some of the modifications that we have made to our plan, certainly going down to 3 twins, that we would hope that we could get your conditional approval this evening. We hope you would consider that. Alternatively, if you would like to see any of these on the plan, or would like to have some discussion, which I think frankly would be appropriate, to see whether we could zero in on an amount rather than simply having a condition, a fair and reasonable amount. That's probably not good for either of us to have a condition that would be undefined in that nature. Then we can certainly come back and if we do come back, and I would offer that we do that, then Mr. Yan would be able to engage in further discussion and explanation that he wanted to go into with you tonight as it relates to our stormwater management. Because we believe, based on the feedback and opinions of our professionals, that what we're doing here is appropriate. What we're doing here is not going to negatively impact the floodplain, is not going to have negative impacts on stormwater runoff, and is going to be ecologically the right thing to do as it relates to this wetland area. So I'm here, I'm happy, and I thank you, Mr. Clark, for allowing me to go through this explanation with you and take the time to do that. But I'm happy to answer questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. All right, council members, do you have any questions, Mayor?
I do not.
All right, hearing no questions, thank you for your presentation. Presentation, and now we can have a discussion of the motion on the table, if there is any discussion that we would like to have. Remote council members, any comments, questions for council?
None, thank you.
Okay, all in favor of the preliminary land development application for 3 Elmwood, please say aye. All opposed? Remote, 2 hands, that is unanimously opposed. Okay, we'll move to 8C, consideration of approval of park rules.
So Council President, we actually have to move that down to the end of the agenda because we actually can't approve that until we approve the ordinance, creating park rules.
Okay, so I'll move to 8D, bike pilot project.
Sure. So this item was recently discussed with the Infrastructure Committee. And as enclosed in your packet, Kimberly Bezak and Jean Durock did a really great job putting together a broad presentation on biking in the borough for my benefit being a new person here. And I thought it was a great summary for infrastructure. And they proposed a number of ideas for 2022 for a bike pilot to build on the success of the project we had last year with the Wheels on Windsor project. So I'm looking at the various options they had. I recommended to the Infrastructure Committee that we pursue the option proposed for Haverford Avenue. Originally, we had talked about putting this item off because of the stormwater project going on Haverford. However, per my manager's report, that's been delayed by 6 months due to materials issues. So we would now, in talking with Ms. Bezak, I would like to recommend that council go ahead, move forward with doing this project this fall, similar to how the Wheels on Windsor project was done. Basically, what would be done is from Wynwood Avenue to the, well, it says the borough office, but I think I've actually talked about going all the way up to Essex, along Haverford, having the, per the diagram on page 2, there'll be parking on one side of the street. There'll be the existing one-way lane of traffic. A share road would be put on the existing traffic lane for bikes to go in the same direction that traffic goes on Haverford. There'd be some sort of divider, and then there'd be a contraflow bike lane against traffic. And I think, I think it'd be great to explore. I think it'd be something that even long-term, with the way that Haverford is set up, it could be something that easily transitions from being a pilot to actually just being a permanent installation if it goes well. And it could be something that we build upon to connect, the park and the downtown area, and then ultimately build from there to connect the borough in terms of biking. So my recommendation to council would be to go ahead and request the borough traffic engineer start working with myself and Ms. Bezak on the actual design for it, which could be presented to infrastructure and then borough council for final approval and implementation.
So this is a spot where bikes are often observed going the wrong way, basically. This is a place where people want to be biking the other direction, where it's not entirely safe to be doing so at the moment, but it would be good to regularize that, I think.
Any other thoughts?
I really like this, as a person who doesn't bike, I like this because I think it will slow traffic down along this stretch, which as a walker, sometimes I feel like people are just like barreling past it, and so I think it's a great idea for any number of reasons.
I like it because it legalizes the use. I've been doing it my whole life.
Yeah, it connects up to that little path on going behind the Thomas Wayne.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so that's which I saw you using.
Yes.
So it's a high priority spot on various bike lanes.
Yes, it's good. It's a good choice. Yes, just a great choice.
Okay. All right, well, no further discussion? Motion to approve. All in favor? Aye. Remote users, I see hands in the air, eyes all around. Thank you very much. Approved unanimously. Let's do 1036 first, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's 8E. Can I get a motion from infrastructure?
I move that we approve ordinance 1036 for park rules.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded. Any discussion here?
So this is the enabling ordinance that lets us then pass rules by resolution.
Correct. Hearing no discussion, all in favor? Aye. Okay. And the ayes have it. Okay, that's unanimous. And now we'll move to 8C. Can I get a motion from infrastructure?
Sure, I move that we approve resolution 2021-019 for park rules.
Is there a second for that?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor McGreevy. Any discussion there?
So this is coming, the impetus from this is coming from the Parks and Rec Board. They've done a study of various parks policies, and these are ones they want in place. They took a look at this last night at their meeting, and they're happy with it. So.
I only had one minor comment, which is not a reason to vote against, which was the sort of the opening time of the park being 6 a.m. And I've seen in previous or other municipalities where it's time to sort of dusk and dawn, and an hour ahead of each, because even in the summertime. Go ahead.
Yeah, I also looked at that on there, and I apologize, this slipped my mind when infrastructure talked about this, so sorry for the surprise here. Talking with Public Works staff this morning during our monthly staff meeting, they asked council to consider, which I support, maybe not being right at dawn or right at 6 a.m. because they need some time to get into the park and do the mowing. And if people are doing stuff and they can't, it interrupts their mowing ability.
We've gotten complaints about them mowing at like 7 a.m. Some of the neighbors are not.
Right, that's another issue. It's the noise from mowing.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a trade-off we have to figure out. Yeah.
The beauty of this is that if we can approve these rules, they will go into effect.
That's true, and then you can
in a
change
very
it.
short period of time.
Exactly,
We
yeah.
can make modifications.
Change them today too.
Yeah, that's terrific. But I would want to have input from our public works team, right, and let infrastructure sort of discuss it. Given the time of year, right, in the summertime is when they would be mowing at 6 a.m. if they could, because it's the sun is up. Right now, So.
One consideration, I know that Parks and Rec, folks wanted signs printed, is that right? That was one of the goals. So. Yeah. If we change the ordinance, then we change
the sign. Signs are not super expensive.
Yeah. But it's just-
The signs could just say dusk to dawn. That's the idea.
Well, I'll say this, I mean, whatever you decide tonight, that's what the sign will say, and then if we do change it in the future, we can keep in mind the fact that signs are cheap but not great.
Is there a consensus to change it from those hours that were listed to dusk to dawn to recognize the changing seasons?
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, I think they're going well beyond dusk. I mean, certainly, we're not going to prohibit people from playing basketball at dusk, right? I mean, those are lights there for a reason. So I think that dusk is not.
This is where we get into the need for more.
Yeah.
We can have separate rules.
How about we don't print the sign? How about we approve this, don't print the signs, and then have the discussion next month to make sure.
Great, okay.
Does that sound fun? Sorry, Parks and Rec.
Do we need
We're
to,
pulled
do
off.
we need to approve rules that we're gonna ask our police not to enforce that can create a complicated situation? Or can we, now that we've passed this ordinance?
I don't know, say dusk till dawn now and and then it's.
And then fine tune it.
Fine tune it later because I don't think anyone's
I
gonna.
would say keep it as written right now, and then we can adjust next month.
Yeah, I would say my advice would be, if we can't enforce something if we don't have signs for it, or makes it much more difficult to enforce something if we don't have signs. As Council President Borough pointed out, signs are relatively cheap. So I would like to go ahead and get signs up there, and then if we change it, we'll change the signs.
So we're making it dusk to dawn. Is that?
Well, whatever you all
So
decide.
I want to speak to that. I'm in favor of dusk to dawn because it's just so completely appropriate. If there's going to be separate times for the lit areas, that can be done separately. Like that, I think you can have both kinds of signs. You can have dusk till dawn on the playing fields, and then you can have another sign, basketball court rules. Hours of use.
What's the
You can
current
set
time
that
in there?
up
10 p.m.
11:30.
11. Let's say dusk to dawn. 11:30 in areas under the lights. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you could say dusk to dawn, except for.
It's just the basketball courts.
Yeah.
So that, you just have separate rules for the basketball courts.
I'd like to ask either the mayor or the chief for some thoughts on this, since it's gonna come to enforcement.
Yeah, you don't want to create areas of confusion or for the police, because that's not helpful. So we want to be clear about areas under the light, you know, maybe add a codicil that says dusk to dawn except areas under spotlight.
If we choose to turn the lights off, you know, you can't be there.
Yeah.
Right? We're the ones who choose the timing of the lights.
Yeah, because without that codicil or that addition, you could create problems for the police.
Chief, any additional comments?
During the summer, just for everybody's information, that does drain some police resources at the courts. Once they start to play late, we get complaints, believe it or not, from neighbors on Windsor Avenue, bouncing the ball, yelling, cursing, screaming. It does start to drain police resources, because sometimes we have to leave an officer on patrol there until the lights go off. So there's got to be a reasonable time where we shut the lights off, just for the quality of life for the community and the neighbors, you know, in the area. It does generate, a lot of people aren't aware of this. We do handle things on a case-by-case basis, and I credit the officers for handling it very well. I like to thank them for things I know that they've done, and I like to thank them for things that I don't know that they've done. I can tell you right away that that is one of the sticking points of conversations with the officers, that they're concerned about some of the safety concerns overall by having the lights on too late and people at the courts. We've seen situations where it's led to vandalism. We've handled this I would say this season, since it opened back up, we handled a few more criminal mischief reports than we ever handled before, a few more vandalism, you know, those type of things, disturbances. So those are just some of the things that take into consideration. We certainly need your support to make sure that there's a quality of life that we deliver to the community.
Thank you. So
Just correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the lights were originally installed on the basketball court to enable the league play in the summer, in the night, during extended hours, because there's so many teams and there's so much league play. Why don't we really seriously consider dusk till dawn everywhere? And like when there's league play, they can turn the lights on. And that kind of addresses the crime problem. And I understand that there's kids in the community that want to play at night. I don't know, you know, maybe we keep them on until a little later or something, but.
So my suggestion would be, this is a full infrastructure meeting to get into this, to hear from the rec board. I think the police department actually has a great role to play in terms of providing some data about the complaints that they're seeing, the mischief issues that they're seeing, right? You may not get residents come to a meeting with that kind of data. You collect that because that's what you do, and you can have that meeting. But right now we have consideration of a set of rules. The modification on the table is to change it to dusk till dawn and in the lighted areas until the lights are turned off, which gives the borough administration total discretion of when the lights are on and when they're off, but they control the time.
Yeah, can we just please say in the lighted areas of the basketball courts? So that there's no parsing. Like I was a YSS, I would have said, hey, I'm under the street light near the dugout, and you
were never that shy.
You can't,
Sure.
like you said in the light, I'm under the light.
So and then we can
Basketball court.
draw in more community members and have a deeper discussion.
Yeah.
Revise the rules. Okay, so that's what's on the table. All in favor? Aye. I see 2 hands. Thank you very much. Moving on, 1037.
On this, just for public's clarity too, this is unless permission is obtained from the borough to do otherwise.
For a special event.
So for example, it says the use of fireworks.
Yeah.
Obviously, if the borough is allowing fireworks, that anything can still
That's
continue.
That's
Yeah, those music events and things. that
There's
go on.
Oktoberfest.
Yeah,
We have
Oktoberfest,
different
it's
things.
gonna happen.
Yeah.
Those are permitted by the borough.
Okay, 1037. Can I get a motion? Finance administration?
Fred, do you want to, if you have it in front of you, do you want to read?
Move that we approve ordinance 1037 for borough manager duties.
Is there a second?
Thank you.
Moved by Rob. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Congratulations, Ms. Bryant. You have officially designated duties.
We've gone from 9, which include enforcing laws, performing necessary duties, attending meetings, and cooperating with council, to 35.
35. How many jobs do you have? Samantha, 35.
I'm here for whatever's brand.
Thank you.
35 things.
Okay, 9A, the monthly reports have been filed. Committee updates. I'll start with you, Fred.
Okay, so in infrastructure, we had a discussion of a bike lane that we just moved forward with. And we had a presentation from Adam Crom of the Planning Commission, who was talking about both traffic calming measures and safety measures that could be taken on a stretch of East Winwood Road near the from the park entrance from Shortridge Park to the tunnel. So some of the things that Mr. Fromwell was discussing, I think he was pulling from that presentation. Mr. Crom's opinion is that you know, if there's, especially if there is a development in that area, it would be good to have sort of a project ready or a list of projects ready that we think would enhance pedestrian safety, and that's well safety for everybody really. The idea is to slow down traffic going through that area and make it safer for pedestrians. So give a presentation of some options. I think he was going to bring that to Lower Marion, like unofficially. I think that was the next step, and see what their planning commission had to say about that. I believe that's it for infrastructure. Jump back in places.
Okay.
Oh, we continue to talk about the potential of a skate park. So we're going to have a discussion again this coming month. We're ready to bring a recommendation to council.
Okay, thank you. Rob, public safety.
So public health and safety met the first week of September, and we had our EV ribbon cutting just a week ago. And so we now have our 4 EV stations, 4 plugs up and running.
Can you just say where they are?
Yeah, so there's one station on Essex with 2 plugs.
The 100 block of Essex.
Right. And then there's one station behind the library, in the municipal lot. 2 plugs. And these are priced in a way to make it possible for residents to charge overnight if needed. And that may make it possible for some residents to make the transition to electric vehicles, especially those without driveways. So we have also been updated on the LED streetlight project, which is about to begin. I know the manager has updated us. So
Friday.
Friday, okay, great. And we have heard several concerns from residents about streetlights that are out and dark streets, and I've been telling people help is on the way. So that project will begin Friday, and do we know how long it will last?
To get everything to get the residential streets, the Cobra heads, will take about a week.
Wow, for the whole work?
Yeah.
Speedy. Okay, so terrific. So we're gonna have a new colored light. People will have to get used to it, right? I mean, the light looks a bit different, but there will definitely be light. And also we have recommended, as you know, the traffic complaint review process. And thanks to Bob Weisbord, the borough manager, and the police chief, we found a very cost-effective way to collect data around traffic complaints. So we're very happy to see that process move forward.
All right, thank you. And lastly, finance and administration.
Thanks. You all should have received the link by now to review the comprehensive plan, something that FNA shared last month. We're asking that you complete that by the 30th, by next week. So it'll give us time to compile that, share with council, and then hold that town hall that we discussed. It was helpful personally to go through because it really, highlighted again community goals and processes that are working really well, like community citizen advocacy that we just saw tonight with bike lanes and the parking task force. And then areas even post-pandemic that I think we need to think of new processes to address some of those comprehensive plan needs. So again, if I can put that on your radar, or I'll please complete that next week. That'll give us time to compile that data that will also potentially inform our budget, which we will see that first draft by October 6th. So this is really timely. Next, we will also receive Ms. Bryant's review of her 6-month job evaluation that we will then use for her yearly review. Ms. Bryant also created a grants calendar that we have all been talking about for so long. And Samantha, I can let you share that a little bit because I know all of council is going to actually be really kind of eager to hear about that organization.
Sure, thank you, Councilman Rickards. So it's still in its infancy. The Finance Administration Committee approved the format of it. So by next month, it should be fleshed out. Basically what it's going to be is a listing of the most relevant grants for the borough. It's going to have keywords that talk about what the grant can fund. And most importantly, it's going to have the usual dates when those grants are due so that we can more proactively plan what grants to apply for and when to apply for grants. It's also going to include a summary of the borough's current grants so that council knows what grants we currently have outstanding and where those are at.
Thank you very much. Anything else, Cindy?
Nope, not at this time.
All right, any comments for the good of council?
Oh, actually, sorry, Council President.
Yes.
I have one comment for Councilor McGrady. So the pricing on the electric vehicle stations, we are working to implement that new pricing. I don't know if it's been implemented yet, but it definitely is in the works to make it, as you said, more favorable to people without driveways to be able to use per what PHS discussed.
Okay. Thank you. Any new business? Any old business?
It's okay. Okay. Actually, sorry, I do have one item of new business for council to consider. So my thanks to Mr. Jim Spear for helping the borough find this television here that we've been using for our meetings the last few months. I think it's been a great proof of concept for how we're doing the remote hybrid meetings and all that. Unfortunately, since we got the television, when it was first donated, I do want to emphasize that we got this television for free thanks to Mr. Spear. When we first got it, there was a single pink line down the middle of it, which wasn't that big of a deal. But I've noticed over the last few months that the line has been getting wider and wider in that side of the TV. So I would like council to consider a budget adjustment to allow borough staff to purchase a similar but newer television that won't have any line down the middle now that we've proved the concept of how hybrid meetings work.
It might be a good deal.
Can you do that by a motion? You could just say yes.
No, I think.
Okay.
We're
They're
aware.
not that expensive.
Well, we're waiting for a Black Friday deal.
Thanks.
84-inch OLED ultra thin display.
That's right.
47K.
I will admit I'll probably try and find something that I can wirelessly connect my laptop to so we can reduce the wire.
That'd be very cool. Also be a great way to share documents from our handhelds too.
Try to be.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, air, yeah, remotely.
Okay, so when we go into an executive session, is there an anticipation that we need to come back and make any decisions in public session?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, well then I'll take a motion to adjourn and we'll take a brief break and then we'll meet in executive session.
I move the adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye, the meeting is adjourned. We will break for 5 minutes. Sharp.
Folks,